I quit. I can't take it anymore. I quit. Last week was I quit making excuses. And we looked at some of the excuses. We talked about Moses, how Moses stood at the fiery bush, and he made excuses, and who wasn't very impressed with his excuses? His wife. They're never very impressed with our excuses. No, God was not. Rank you over here. God was not very impressed with Moses' excuses. As a matter of fact, God got kind of irritated with Moses' excuses. If you remember why, it's because when Moses said to God, hey, God, I'm too weak, I can't do this, God took that as a affront on him. And to say, well, you're good enough if I say you're good enough. Okay, and we talked a lot about that my weakness plus God's all-powerfulness is unstoppable. Yeah, so that was last week. I quit making excuses. Now this week is I quit complaining. I asked some of you what you complain about. We got a lot of stuff about husbands. We got stuff about wives. We got stuff about, I noticed a kind of a neat pattern that you inevitably get. Some people says, well, I hate my job. And the other person says, I wish I had a job. Okay, one person, I'm going to kill my kids. Another person, I would really wish I could have some kids. One person says, I'm too busy. Another person says, I'm too bored. By the way, if you're bored, you're boring. Okay, but there are a lot of the stuff that we complain about is stuff that we normally would be really, really grateful about, yeah, or some people, and so it's very subjective what we complain about, and so a lot of you said those kinds of things. We had I'm listed in like deer heads being put in the house. Apparently that was bad. A whole bunch. We had a lot of funny stuff, of which I just wanted to. Some of you said that drivers. A lot of people don't like drivers. Okay, a lot of. A lot of women don't like other women. That's just how it is, I guess. But potholes, traffic, too much housework, not enough time. But none of you said this like on the Facebook thing, but I heard you say this just to me, and that is people that roll the toilet paper from the back. Okay. Do we have any back rollers in here? Again, and I was reflecting on this particular one, and I was talking to the Lord about it, and I think He gave me some revelation. There is actually some, it is. Just put this in your head for a minute, okay? You're reaching for the toilet paper. If it is rolled from the back, your unwashed hand has to cross the clean toilet paper, okay? And so if you go into the bathroom and the toilet paper is rolled from the back, their hand might have brushed against the unused toilet paper, getting their toilet paper, especially if they do what I always do. Hand on and carry it. Right? Okay. So I just want to tell you, there's actually some really good reasons to roll from the front. I'm just saying, okay? And so if you are, we're not going to do crumple fold. Okay, that's a youth group thing. I don't know if I could get, I don't know if I can do that Sunday morning. And so my wife, she's Scott, are you kidding me? But people, we all, complaining is so second nature to us. You go all the way back to the beginning, and we get one of the very first complaints in the Bible. Adam is saying to God, why did you give me this woman to cause all these problems, to make me do things you didn't like, It wasn't me, God, it was her. He complains about his wife, and that's what they do. We see in the scripture that we are not unique in our complaining a lot. But Job said, I loathe my very life. Therefore, I will give free rein to my complaint, and I will speak out in the bitterness of my soul. And so I'm not even going to rein it in. I'm just going to let it go, and I'm just going to complain. And we know that the Israelites were a complaining people. Check out this in Exodus chapter 16, verse 2. It says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled or complained against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. Little drama queen, right? If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out to this desert to starve the entire assembly to death. And the VeggieTales version of this, I get to watch that because it plays in the back of my van all the time. So I have no idea what the cartoon looks like. I just know what it really sounds like. And they're saying, oh, remember back in Egypt we had all these things? And then Larry the cucumber says, but we were in slavery. And he's like, we forget, but our perspectives, what we were blessed about one day, we are complaining about the next. And that's what's happening with the Israelites. They were a complaining people. But I want to tell you that complaining costs you something, okay? Now, every kid has done this, and so probably never mind. If someday Elizabeth is going to get old enough to know that she gets in illustrations a lot. And so I know one preacher that would give his kids $5 every time he used them in an illustration. So then they, instead of being like, oh, Dad, don't talk about me, they'd be like, come on, Dad, isn't there something about me you can share? So that's pretty good strategy. Me, a pastor's kid, you get some attention that other kids don't. And so, anyway, and this happened. You set up a whole day for your kid. You're going here, going there. Maybe it's the pumpkin patch, or maybe something that you would really much rather not be there. But you go for your kid, and you get your kid there, and your kid has fun for a while, but then they get bored and whiny, and they didn't get some toy, and then they just become a pill. You ever been there? Has your husband ever done that? Okay. Yeah. Yes, she says. Okay. Complaining is really irritating to God. And just to show you how irritating to God complaining is, we read this in Numbers. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And he heard them, his anger was aroused. The fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some on the outskirts of the camp. And we could walk through Israel's story over and over again. They would complain about stuff, and God would get mad. And I think that, God is, guys, I did the plagues for you. I turned the river into blood. I split the Red Sea. I caused all these things to happen. I've done all this for you, and now I've got you out. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to argue with me and complain. One of the reasons why they had to spend so long in the desert rather than going right to the promised land is because they didn't want to trust God, and they were at the core of complaining. And I want you to hear this, okay? At the core of complaining is selfishness. And I want to tell you that in this life, where God is concerned especially, this isn't about you. And so now we joke about complaining. We had a lot of fun joking about complaining online and stuff. And it's one of those things that we all do. But complaining has a cost. It has a cost. And one of the biggest costs is complaining offends the heart of God. It offends the heart of God. Like a kid that you bring to a play park, and by the end of the day, they are just completely ungrateful. Now, your kid is a kid, right? Elizabeth is 5. And I wish that I was mature enough to not let my child offend me. Okay, right? I wish that, but sometimes if I get tired too, I'm the only person who's ever done this, I'm pretty sure. So you'll just see how a loser I really am. I'll go tit for tat with my 5-year-old. Okay. Daddy, wah, 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 wah. And I'll come back because I'm tired. Wah, 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 wah. And my wife will say something later in the day like, "Yeah, you were a little short today." I'm going tit for tat with a 5-year-old, right? And we can go down to that level. But complaining, even when I know she's only 5, even when I know her view of the world, kids lack empathy. They haven't been where we are. They don't get what money costs. All that kind of stuff. I can know all of that. But in that moment, when I've already bought her one thing and she wants something else, and in Elizabeth's defense, she doesn't do it very often, but it's offensive. It just makes you mad at your kid, right? If you have a family member that you did something for, and it costs you something, pretend you loan them a car or whatever it was, and then they just acted completely entitled and even complained about your gift. Have you ever given somebody something, and rather than saying thank you, they complained about it? That's irritating. It is so ungrateful. And can you imagine being God, looking at the Israelites and answering their prayers, bringing them out of Egypt, only to have them complain. And in Numbers, we see that it irritated him so much that he literally sent fire from heaven and was consuming people, and they were dead. So if you ever get home and your lawn is scorched and black, you may have irritated God with your complaining. Okay? But God, he doesn't think our complaining is very funny. He actually, it really irritates it. It offends the heart of God. We find out in Numbers. Oh, I'll read it with you. Now the people complained to their hardships. That's the one we just read. That's why there's no notes there. Complaining carries significant consequences. Okay? Not only does it irritate God, but in the Israelites' case, it irritated him, and he actually punished them as a result of their complaining. But it has other consequences as well. One of the consequences that complaining has is you are not fun to have around when you are a complaining person. Okay? People don't want to hear our complaints, okay? But another thing that it does is it reinforces all of that negative energy inside of us. And it puts it out there in the stratosphere, and it gets amplified when it gets on the outside of us. And so as you start to complain, you're engaging your brain and you're reinforcing those feelings. And so there's significant consequences. 14, God is talking again about Israel. This is a couple chapters later than the last verse we read. How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as surely as I live, not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home. Why did they not get to go to the promised land right away? Why did they wander around in the desert for 40 years? It's because they irritated God with their complaints. Because they weren't grateful. They were selfish. Now, it's possible that you may not get something you want specifically because you complained. Now, pick on Elizabeth again. She'd make a fortune today. You're in that moment, and you say no, and the kid responds poorly. They get bratty and things, and what does that do? Does that endear you to do things for him? No. It's more like not wanting to be too hard on him. I don't want to do anything for you. You're not putting me in a mood to buy you stuff, And then they learn to manipulate you, and they get cute really fast, but you can tell they're faking it. Those little kids. But so you may not get what you actually want because you complained. Because God did it. Because God did it here. In other words, Numbers chapter 14, verse 17, it's very possible that God will do it to you. What do I mean by that? God said, well, if you're going to complain about this, I'm not going to give it to you for another 40 years. Our God appreciates gratitude, and it matters. It has consequences to be an unhappy, selfish person, because God does that. Now I'll tell you, in our home, in Kruse, from years ago, we are not allowed to complain about money at home. And there was a period of years when we didn't have any money. I know that most people have a story like that. When we're back here, we went through this financial hard time. Our financial hard time was almost 10 years ago now, and I would have made more money had I slept in bed for 2 years. Okay, we spiraled into debt. We didn't lose our home, but our credit cards went crazy, and it was. And I will tell you that I always tell you guys to pick a percentage, give it first, and increase it as your faith and means grow. Okay, and so we believed in tithing. And I'll tell you this: the first thing we did every month was tithe. And you say, well, Scott, that doesn't make any sense. You should pay off your credit cards before you tithe. That's not the way my Bible reads. God says, I want the first fruits. And so that's what we did. And now when you are going through these things, it's easy to complain. It's easy to whine. And I would whine to God. I won't go too far into it, but we whine to him, and then he can, he pulls our chain a little bit. But we were not allowed to complain about money at home because Inger-Lisa's grandma she said that. We don't complain about money because we are some of the richest people in the world. And I was reflecting on that this week as I was preparing, that Inger-Lisa would get after me if I whined about money. Even when, in our culture, we were going through some significant hard times. But the reality is, we live in the richest country in the world. We have it easier than any generation that has ever lived. And, so even as we were going through what we were never hungry. We always had a roof over our heads. We always, we were still moving forward. And we don't complain about money. And I think that God appreciates gratitude. Now, one of the problems with complaining is when you start seeing the negative, that begins to be all you see. The word is a confirmation bias. Now, this is I was looking for this word in a small group this week, and it's confirmation bias. And that is, if you are buying a new Toyota and you drive down the road, all you see are Toyotas. Okay. That's confirmation bias. Normally, you just wouldn't notice them, but now you think they're everywhere because you're kind of seeing them. If there's a kind of coat that you want or something, there's a confirmation bias that happens. When you are a half-full person and your head goes that way, your confirmation bias is to find all the negative. There was a realtor, and he was showing a couple a house, and the couple was looking at this house, and the couple said, "Hey, what are the people like in this neighborhood?" And he said, "Well, what were the people like in your old neighborhood?" And they said, "They were so stuck up. They wouldn't talk to us, and they were just total jerks, a lot of them. So we're really hoping this next place is the same." And he said, "Well, I hate to tell you this, but actually, you're probably going to find they're about the same here as they were there." And the next week, that realtor was showing some people and the same property, and they said, what's the neighborhood like? Are the people nice here? And he said, "Well, what was the people like at your last neighborhood?" And they said, "Oh, you know what? It was like second family. We got together, we did stuff together, we knew our neighbors." And he said, "Well, you're probably going to find the people here are like the people that neighborhood that you left. They're the same." Because complaining is almost always perspective. Complaining is almost always perspective. You complain about your husband, but yet a lot of people are complaining that they don't have a husband. You complain about your wife, a lot of people wish they had a wife. You complain about your job, some people wish they had a job. You complain about your job, and some people wish that they had a better job like yours. You complain about your car, you go on and on and on and on. And you can begin to see from God's cosmic perspective how completely unimpressed he is with our complaining. It's just not enjoyable for him at all. Can you imagine, little Scott Kruse going through a financial hard time, talking to the God of the universe and saying, "God, I couldn't make my house payment this month." And now he cares about me. He loves me. But what his word tells me is, "My grace is sufficient for you. Trust me." And we're not going to preach that today, but his word is pretty clear. You do things God's way, and you just push on, and his word promises he's going to take care of us. We don't always know what that's going to look like. Only somebody wanting your money is going to preach and tell you that it's going to be easy the whole time, because it's not. You can look in God's word, and you can see lots of examples where his people had to push through difficult times. But the reality is, God's like, Scott, if I got your back, you got nothing to complain about. And God is so very unimpressed by it. Someone says, "Well, there's no good men at church." No, there's not. But when you are a complainer, you find stuff to complain about. I want to tell you that complaining is a spiritual problem. And if you are the type of person who get into a situation and you immediately start to complain, one of the things I want to suggest to you is that complaining is one of the things that we can look at that exposes some really ugly things inside of us. So how do we begin to restrain our complaining? How do I not complain? Well, so what? How do I not complain? Number one, do you remember the main point from about was it 2 weeks ago? Shut your face. This applies here too. Remember that from 2 weeks ago? Shut your face. Complaining, that's a good place to start. Because this is what's going to happen. When you feel yourself wanting to complain and you bite your tongue and you don't complain, I want to tell you that the Bible tells us that it's out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. Okay? And so if you've got stuff inside of you that is not looking good, it tends to come out of your mouth. And so if you find yourself wanting to complain and you shut your face, which is a good thing to do, but then say, okay, God, what's going on here? Obviously, I want to tell you, if you're a complainer, you are selfish. Okay? And I think we're going to unpack that here in reverse, so I don't want to steal my thunder. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. Do everything without complaining or arguing. Now, I will tell you that one of the things that I find convicting about Scripture is that the Bible wouldn't tell me to do it if it was impossible for me to do it. Okay? If it was impossible for me to quit complaining, the Bible wouldn't be so clear with that. So apply it to your life and just stop it. Stop complaining. We complain when we think that we are the important ones. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for the building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. How often is my complaining to benefit somebody else? And how often is it just me venting? There was a study done, that Stossel guy from 2020, and the study was specifically about anger, but the principle is the same. And they were going through wives' tales, like, different things that you think are true, but they're not true. And they're saying that people say that if you vent your anger, you feel better afterward. And they've studied this and found that as completely false. If you have ever thought to yourself, I need to get it out and just let it rip and rip into this person, and they've measured that, and the feeling of anger lasts longer, not shorter. You say, well, I feel good at the time. Well, that vindictive little moment of time has a really high price. The same is true when it comes to complaining. That when you complain, does your attitude get better or does it get worse? Well, it gets worse. When you complain, does it help or does it hurt the people around you? Well, it hurts them. How many times have you been at the office or you've been at your job and somebody's complaining about stuff and you're like, yeah, it hadn't even occurred to me to be upset about that before. Thank you. You have blessed my life. But isn't that exactly what happens? Have you ever been in a group of people and you've got one sour apple and you're like, one sour apple spoils the bunch. You got one negative person in there and it just bleeds out into the whole staff. And maybe you've noticed this. I've noticed this. You can tell that's happening when you can track the vocabulary. Okay, so you know this person feels this way, and then you come over here, and there's a unique choice of words that they use over here that came from over here. Okay, complaining, it's a rot that goes from one thing to the next to the next to the next, and it is rotten and it spoils. It's not a blessing. So build up. If you're like me, sometimes you've got to use a little self-control not to complain. Maybe something's irritating you. Maybe something is under your skin. Maybe you're just feeling discombobulated and you're not sure why the world is a little darker that day. I don't know, but sometimes I'll pray before a conversation. I'll say, God, I pray that absolutely nothing negative will come out of my mouth. That when I leave that person, that their day is going to be better and they're going to feel blessed. And sometimes by putting that in my head going into a conversation, I do a better job. Or I will speak ill of no man. I'm not going to say anything bad about anything or anybody. I'm going to put my faith in God to do this. So why? Why should you quit complaining? This is important. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14. It says, do everything without complaining or arguing. Now look at this. So that you may become blameless and pure. Isn't it interesting that this verse doesn't say, quit lying so you can become blameless and pure. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say, quit lusting so you can become blameless and pure. It doesn't say that. It's saying, without complaining or arguing, you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a crooked and deprived generation. So if you want to be like Jesus, if you want to do something that is going to make you a lot like Jesus, quitting complaining will go a long way to it. It could have said a lot of things there, but what Paul said was quit complaining. Why? Because when we complain, we are the center of our universe. We are it. And the very first words of Rick Warren's book, A Purpose-Driven Life, is, it's not about you. At the core of complaining is selfishness. And is selfishness. Luke chapter 6, verse 45, for out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So you can bite your tongue and you can fix your complaining by just not speaking. But I want to encourage you that actually isn't where the problem is. The problem isn't your mouth. The problem is your heart. Because it's out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. That's why, in this case, it's not quite enough to just shut your face. Because when you feel yourself wanting to complain, or you feel yourself complaining, it's actually exposing something that is very un-Christ-like in you. It's exposing something that is kind of ugly about you. And I only live in my own head, but when I feel myself complaining, some of the ugliness that I find when I dig down a couple levels is I find jealousy. I'm jealous of that person, and so I'm complaining about him. I find competitiveness. I find a lack of faith in God. I find a dissatisfaction and an ingratitude to God. All very ugly things that live inside of me. And when I feel like complaining, it should be a big flag waving at you saying, not like Jesus. You're having to complain all day long? Un-Christ-like. I want to encourage you to be more like Jesus today. And one of the ways that you can be blameless and faultless is to stop complaining. But it's got to happen. You got to align your heart with the heart of God. You got to align your heart with the heart of God. Because as you do that, you'll care about the things that He cares about. So we've talked about the what, do not complain. The why, because we want to be like Jesus. So how do we do that? Now, the Apostle Paul helps us again. Philippians chapter 2, verse 17. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming to your faith, I am glad to rejoice with all of you, so that you should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul is writing this, and he's expecting to die soon. Now, we don't quite know how Paul died or when. There's some different ideas. But as he writes this, he is in prison, and he's expecting to die soon. And he says to the Philippians that even if my life is a drink offering poured out to God. Now, you thought you had something to complain about? Paul, sitting in jail, waiting to die. Okay? His life is drawing close. He's been beaten. He's been unappreciated by the churches that he planted. He had people that he loved turn on him and say things about him that weren't true. All of these things had happened. And he's sitting in his jail cell, probably cold. He apparently had writing supplies. He had an attendant that was allowed to be with him. He's actually living in kind of a home, but he was kind of a house arrest type thing. And he's writing this, and he says, even if my life is a drink offering poured out. Why is that significant? The drink offering that he's talking about is, there's different kind of offerings in the Old Testament. I alluded to one a couple of weeks, our Old Time Gospel Sunday. And they would have a sacrifice. They'd sacrifice a bull, and they would burn a portion of it, and then they would eat a portion of it. Or the priests would get a portion of it, and that was how they made their living. They would get a portion of the sacrifices, okay? So part of it would be burned, but part of it would be given to the priests. A drink offering was unique, because a drink offering, you would take wine, and you would pour it in the dirt. And why that was significant is, it was done. The priest wasn't going to get any. There was going to be no party with it later, like there would be with sacrificing a bull. It was just in the dirt. And Paul is saying, even if my life is just poured in the dirt, that's what I'm going to do for my Jesus. I was speaking to a minister friend of mine, and he quoted this verse. And he was out of ministry, and he was going through some struggles, and some different things hadn't gone. And he said, Scott, even if my life is a drink offering, that's okay with me. I don't need anybody to know my name. I don't need to be successful. I don't need to be cool. I just want to be a drink offering, And this guy's one of the best piano players I've ever met. He pastored for a while, and he did really well, but he was going through a difficult time, way more talented than me. Way more talented than me. And so to hear him say, even if my life is a drink offering, that's okay with me. And he meant it. And I thought, God, I want to be like that. I want pleasing you to be more important than me being successful. God, I want pleasing you. Lord, even if my life is a drink offering, even if nobody ever knows my name, even if my life doesn't even yield any results, I want it to be yours. So God, maybe you want me to get lots of people saved. Maybe I'll just, whatever. God, I just want to be yours. That was so releasing for me. And I want to encourage you that prayer, to get to that place, that's like Jesus.